the mistake they never saw coming. It started like any other day, but something in the air felt different. Keanu Reeves walked quietly through the private entrance of Lax, the sun still low in the sky as a breeze slipped through the palm trees outside. Dressed in his usual black jeans, a soft, worn-out hoodie, and sunglasses that barely hid the calm in his eyes, he didn't look like someone who'd just wrapped filming a blockbuster. He looked like someone trying to disappear into the world, a quiet man carrying more than just a suitcase, a man who knew silence better than most knew noise. The flight was bound for Tokyo, a long-haul journey Keanu had made many times before. But this one had a purpose. Not for a premiere, not for press. This time, he was on his way to see a sick friend, an old stunt double from the Matrix days who'd been diagnosed with a rare neurological disorder. The man had saved Keanu's life during a stunt gone wrong years ago, and Keanu had promised then that if ever he needed something, anything, he'd be there. This was that moment. A quiet promise echoing through time. As he reached the first-class check-in counter, he removed his sunglasses and gave the staff a gentle smile. The attendant, a young woman named Clara, barely looked up from her screen. "Ticket?" she asked, her tone flat, eyes scanning the line behind him. "Sure," Keanu said calmly, offering the digital boarding pass from his phone. She glanced at it, her brows furrowed. Something flickered in her expression. Annoyance? Disbelief? Maybe both. She tapped the screen a few more times, then sighed dramatically. "Sir, I'm afraid we've had an overbooking situation. Your seat in first class has been reassigned." Keanu tilted his head, still calm. "Reassigned?" "Yes," she said without looking at him again. "You've been downgraded to economy. Please check the gate monitor for updates." There was no apology, no explanation, just a printed economy boarding pass and a dismissive wave. Other passengers watched the exchange, some whispering as they recognized who he was. Others simply stared, unsure what to say. But Keanu didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice or flash his name for leverage. He simply nodded, thanked her, and moved to the side, away from the counter. He took a deep breath, as if steadying, something invisible within him. A man nearby had been watching. A father in his 40s with 2 young daughters. He approached Keanu, unsure at first, then said quietly, Was that fair? They shouldn't treat anyone like that." Keanu gave a small smile. "It's all right," he said. "Sometimes people are just doing what they're told. Maybe today's a hard day for her." The man looked at him with something like awe. "You're a good man." Keanu didn't answer. He simply turned and walked toward the waiting area, where the hard plastic seats felt colder than usual. But his thoughts weren't on the seat, or even on the rudeness at the counter. His mind was already across the ocean with a man lying in a hospital bed, alone, waiting. Behind the scenes, however, something had already begun to move, unbeknownst to Keanu. A middle-aged employee from the maintenance department had witnessed the entire interaction. His name was Paul, and he'd worked at the airline for 22 years. He wasn't rich, he wasn't powerful, but he had one thing that made him different. He believed in doing what was right, no matter the cost. And he knew exactly who that man at the counter was. He stepped away from the janitor's closet, heart racing, and pulled out his phone. He hesitated, then made a call. Not to the front desk, not to a supervisor, but to someone he'd once met during an employee appreciation banquet. Someone who had once shaken his hand and said, "If you ever see something that feels wrong, speak up, even if it's about me." His call went directly to voicemail, so he left a message. Short, urgent, honest. "This is Paul from Ground Ops. You need to know what just happened with Keanu Reeves. It wasn't right. Check the check-in logs. It happened at 10:24 a.m. Gate 4. Meanwhile, Keanu sat in the back of the terminal, headphones in, listening to soft instrumental music. He didn't want to be recognized. But even with a baseball cap low over his face, the occasional glance and whisper reminded him he wasn't invisible. A young girl, no more than 12, approached him timidly. She clutched a sketchbook in her hands, trembling. Are you "Are you really him?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Keanu looked up and smiled. "Depends. Who do you think I am?" She smiled shyly. "John Wick." He laughed, not loudly but warmly. "Ah, that guy. He's a little scary. I'm not as cool." She opened her sketchbook and revealed a drawing, a pencil sketch of him in a movie pose, detailed and beautiful. "I drew this. It's for you." He took the drawing, eyes softening, and nodded slowly. "This is beautiful. Thank you." As the girl walked away beaming, Keanu leaned back and closed his eyes. He hadn't noticed the airport staff running around behind the scenes, or the phone calls being made, in a high-floor office inside the airport administration building. A man in a sharp suit and quiet authority was staring at Paul's voicemail. His name was Ethan Wells, the airline's newly appointed president. He'd been trying to change things to restore dignity, respect, and compassion back into an industry slowly losing its soul. And this message, this situation, it shook something inside him. He called his executive assistant. "Get me Gate 4 check-in logs now, and find out if Keanu Reeves is still in the terminal." Back in the terminal, the boarding process began. Keanu waited patiently for his group to be called. Even in economy, he didn't complain, he didn't demand. He simply followed. As he handed over his ticket to the gate agent, something changed. A voice came over the airport intercom. "Passenger Reeves, please remain at the gate. Do not board yet. Passenger Reeves, please remain at the gate." The agent looked confused. "Sir?" Keanu paused. "Must be a mistake." But before anyone could say anything else, the crowd turned as a group of suited men approached. At their center was Ethan Wells himself, walking briskly with purpose, phone still in hand. His presence turned heads. Passengers froze. Employees stiffened. Even Clara, still working behind the counter, looked up and went pale. Ethan stopped in front of Keanu and extended his hand. "Mr. Reeves," he said, breath steady but voice sharp, "I owe you an apology." Keanu looked surprised, shaking his hand gently. "For what?" "For how you were treated, for how any human being was treated, and for forgetting that kindness should never depend on someone's status." He turned to the nearby employees, his eyes landing on Clara. This man should have never been downgraded, not because he's famous, but because he's a human being who deserved respect. He faced Keanu again. "If you're willing, I'd like to invite you to a conversation. In private, right now, about how we fix this company from the inside out." Gasps rippled through the terminal. Passengers stopped boarding. Cameras came out. People whispered in disbelief. But Keanu just looked around, thoughtful, quiet. Then, finally, he said, "All right, let's talk." And just like that, he followed Ethan out of the gate area. What neither of them knew was that someone had recorded the whole thing. And by the time the plane took off, the world was already watching. The video that changed everything as Keanu walked beside Ethan through the airport's inner corridors. There was a shift in the air that neither of them could quite put into words. The clatter and chaos of the terminal faded behind them, replaced by the hum of fluorescent lights and the soft echo of footsteps. The hallways were sterile, lined with security doors and windows that offered glimpses of luggage belts and control rooms. It was the unseen side of the airport, hidden from the passengers but full of stories that never made the news. And today, this hidden place was where something extraordinary was about to unfold. Ethan didn't say much at first. He walked with purpose, every step revealing how serious this situation had become to him. But his mind was not on public image or corporate embarrassment. It was on something deeper, something personal that even his boardroom had never heard. Keanu, on the other hand, remained silent as well, not because he was unsure, but because he was listening, observing, sensing the energy around him. He had a way of being present without needing to fill silence with noise. His quiet had weight, and Ethan felt it. They entered a glass-walled conference room nestled within the airline's executive wing. It was sleek, minimal, and cold, until Keanu stepped in. His presence made the room feel warmer, more human. A tray of untouched coffee and snacks sat on the side table, clearly prepared in haste. But Keanu ignored all of that. He simply sat down across from Ethan, placed his phone face down, and looked him in the eye. "You said you wanted to talk?" he said calmly. "I'm listening." Ethan exhaled, sat down, and leaned forward with his elbows on the table. "First, I want you to know that what happened wasn't just a mistake. It was a symptom of something broken." Keanu nodded slowly. "And you want to fix it?" "I have to," Ethan replied, his voice low. "Not because it's good for business, but because it's the right thing to do." Keanu studied him for a moment, then asked the one question that mattered. "Why now?" And that's when Ethan's mask cracked. The polished exterior of a corporate leader gave way to something more raw, more vulnerable. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small photo. He slid it across the table. It showed a smiling girl in a wheelchair holding a toy airplane in one hand and a paper boarding pass in the other. "That's my daughter," Ethan said softly. "Maria. She was 7 when she first told me she wanted to fly. She dreamed of becoming a pilot. Every year we'd take a trip somewhere new. But one time, a gate agent told her she couldn't pre-board with the wheelchair because she wasn't technically a passenger with special needs under their current policy. She was 6. She cried for hours. I didn't argue, I didn't complain. But that moment never left me." Keanu looked down at the photo, then back up. "So now you're in charge, and you want to build something better?" "Yes," Ethan whispered. "But no one listens when you speak from the top down. They listen when something real happens. Something public. Something painful." Keanu leaned back in his chair. "Like a mistake with someone who happens to be recognized." Ethan nodded, ashamed. "It shouldn't take that, but here we are." Outside the room, however, something entirely different was happening. The video of Keanu being downgraded and then stopped at the gate had been uploaded to social media just 20 minutes ago. But already, it had been viewed over 400,000 times. Someone had captured the whole exchange. His calm response, the crowd's reaction, Ethan's arrival, and that powerful line. This man should have never been downgraded. Not because he's famous, but because he's a human being who deserved respect. It spread like wildfire. Influencers reposted it. Celebrities commented. News outlets began preparing segments even before confirming the full story. Inside the airport's media monitoring room, 2 staff members watched the trend unfold in real time. The intern in charge of analytics turned to her supervisor and said, "This is going to hit global press within the hour. We need to issue a response." But what no one knew, not the media team, not the executives, not even Ethan, was that Keanu's reaction wasn't just being praised because of who he was. It was because people saw themselves in him. People who had been overlooked, dismissed, mistreated because they didn't fit into someone else's idea of importance. And Keanu's quiet grace in that moment had unlocked something powerful in them. The world wasn't reacting to a celebrity injustice. It was reacting to a mirror. Back in the room, Ethan's phone buzzed violently. He glanced down, his face draining of color. He stood up and walked toward the wall-mounted monitor, connected it to his phone, and displayed the social media feed. Keanu's eyes scanned the flood of comments, reposts, and stitched videos. He saw teenagers reacting with tears, veterans sharing stories of their own downgrades, single mothers recalling how they were treated differently when flying alone with kids. It was no longer about him. "I didn't expect this," Ethan said, his voice barely audible. "You didn't plan it," Keanu replied. "That's why it matters." Ethan turned to him. "Can you help me? Not just with a statement. I mean, help me redesign this culture. Show people what kindness can look like inside a machine this big." Keanu didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood and walked toward the window. He looked out at the runway where planes took off every few minutes, cutting through the clouds as if they carried more than passengers. Maybe hopes, maybe regrets. After a long pause, he said, "I don't want this to be about fixing just one flight or one airport. If we do this, we make it a movement. Ethan looked at him, puzzled. A movement? Yes, Keanu replied, turning back. Something that teaches every person, employee or passenger, that their story matters, not because of what they wear or who they are, but because they exist. Ethan slowly smiled. I think we can do that. We start today, Keanu said, but we don't announce it. Why not? Because real change doesn't need to be announced. It shows up in silence, in choices, in how we treat the next person at the counter. Just then, another call came in. It was from Japan. Keanu's face shifted. He picked up, listened for a moment, then quietly nodded. When he ended the call, he turned back to Ethan, his eyes a little heavier. My friend, the one I was flying to see. He passed away just now. The room fell silent. Ethan stepped forward. I'm so sorry. Keanu nodded, but the weight was different now. I didn't get to say goodbye, but maybe today wasn't about me getting there. Maybe it was about what happened here. The two men stood in that stillness, bound not by business or fame, but by a shared understanding that something bigger was taking shape. And outside that room, the video hit its first 1,000,000 views. One letter, thousands of hearts. The following morning, the world felt different. The sun rose like it always did, but its light fell on a world that had just witnessed something unexpectedly human. People woke up to push notifications they didn't expect. Keanu Reeves's kindness stuns. Airport crowd. Airline president apologizes publicly. The moment that brought an airport to tears. Everywhere, from breakfast tables to subway screens, the video played in silence and in sound, on televisions in cafes, on phones held by trembling hands. But beneath the headlines and reposts, something else had begun to unfold. Something more intimate, more powerful than any trending topic. It started with a single letter. In a small house outside Oakland, California, a woman named Delilah sat in her modest kitchen, watching the morning news with tears in her eyes. She was a retired airline attendant, once proud, once fierce, but now quieted by years of being overlooked. She recognized Keanu the second she saw the video. Not from the movies, not from the fame, but from a moment 10 years ago that had changed her forever. A moment that no one else knew about. A moment she had never told anyone until now. With trembling hands, she opened her laptop and began typing a letter. Not to the press, not for social media, but to the airline itself, addressed to whoever would listen. The email was simple, but the story inside was not. She wrote about a night in Seattle, during a storm that had grounded every flight and stranded thousands. She had been working a double shift, barely holding it together. Passengers were screaming, children were crying, and the managers had all but vanished. But there was one man, quiet, calm, and dressed in black, who didn't shout, didn't complain. Instead, he knelt beside a tired mother and offered to entertain her son with shadow puppets. He gave up his own seat so an elderly couple could stay together. He carried a suitcase for a pregnant woman who couldn't stand any longer. And when Delilah finally sat down for a moment behind the desk, drained and defeated, he handed her a coffee without saying a word. She remembered looking up at him, seeing the same face now flooding every screen in the country. And she had never forgotten. She ended the email with this: I don't know if he remembers me, but I'll never forget what he did that night, and maybe now the world knows the man we all should be. What she didn't know was that her message would be forwarded by a junior executive to someone in media relations, who then passed it to the new empathy committee that Ethan had quietly formed just the night before. The letter, raw and untouched, reached his personal inbox by noon. And when he read it, he didn't forward it. He printed it, walked it over to Keanu, who was still in the executive wing preparing a private tribute to his friend in Japan, and placed it gently on the table without a word. Keanu read it once, then again. Then sat in silence, eyes fixed on the page, breath unsteady. And finally, he whispered. Her name was Delilah. She had a pin on her uniform shaped like a tiny silver plane. I remember. Ethan leaned against the wall. The world's waking up, Keanu. And they're not just watching. They're remembering. In the hours that followed, more letters came, not just from passengers but from employees, baggage handlers, janitors, technicians. Stories began to pour in from places long forgotten by corporate memos. One by one, voices spoke of a man who had touched them without cameras, without statements, without knowing the weight of his own kindness. A flight attendant from Detroit recounted how Keanu had once helped her clean an entire aisle when a child had gotten sick, telling her, "You've got enough to do already." A ground worker in Vancouver remembered how he'd found Keanu sitting alone in a back corridor with a homeless man who had somehow wandered into the terminal, talking to him like an old friend, then quietly arranging for him to get food and help. None of these moments had ever been seen before. None of them had ever been shared until now. Meanwhile, social media exploded with a new hashtag, #BeKindLikeKeanu. It wasn't created by a brand. It wasn't pushed by a publicist. It was started by a 17-year-old girl in Chicago who had been bullied at school and had always felt invisible. She wrote, "If he can be gentle in a storm, maybe I can too." Her words lit a fire in people's hearts. What began as a video was now a movement, a quiet revolution of compassion. But as the wave of stories grew, so did something else. Buried among the flood of emails and posts, there came a video file. No title, no caption, just a timestamp and a location tag from a regional airport in Colorado. The thumbnail showed Keanu sitting alone on the floor beside a vending machine, dressed in a hoodie, holding the hand of a boy no older than 6 who was clearly crying. Ethan clicked on it. The footage, though grainy, captured the entire scene. A family had missed their connecting flight due to delays. The father had been detained for questioning due to a ticket issue. The mother, in distress, had left her crying son briefly to speak with security. During that moment, the boy had wandered away, sobbing, scared and alone. And Keanu, without a second thought, had sat down with him, not to pose, not to comfort for show, but to be there, to tell stories, to wipe the boy's tears. And finally, when the mother returned in a panic, he stood up, smiled, and stepped away like a ghost. No one had noticed at the time, but now, someone had. Ethan watched the video 3 times in silence, then turned to Keanu, who had already received it too. Keanu said nothing. He just closed his eyes. And then he said, "I don't want them to thank me." "What do you want?" Ethan asked. "I want them to remember that it's possible," he replied. "Possible to be kind, without reward, without permission, just because." And outside that room, in cities all over the world, people began leaving letters at airport counters, taping notes to bathroom mirrors, scribbling messages on napkins in terminals. "You matter. Breathe. You're not alone. Someone sees you." The ripple was no longer tied to Keanu's name. It had become something more, a force, a language that needed no fame to spread. But then, just as the movement began to take shape, a voice from Keanu's past surfaced, a voice no one expected to hear, someone who had once been close to him during a dark chapter, someone who had disappeared without a word, had just posted a message online with only 4 words. "He saved my life." And with that, a whole new story was about to begin. The psycho shadow from yesterday. The message came quietly, tucked into the wave of admiration and praise like a whisper in a storm. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't trending. It didn't even include a picture. Just 4 words. 4 quiet, aching words posted from a faceless account with no bio and no followers. "He saved my life." At first, no one noticed it. Then someone replied, and another. Soon, curious users began tracing the account, wondering if it was someone real or just another fan. What they uncovered instead was a thread leading back more than 15 years into a story even Keanu himself had never told publicly. Because not all acts of kindness were meant to be remembered. Some were meant to be buried. Ethan sat in his office staring at the post. It had been forwarded to him by the Empathy Committee's intern, who flagged it not for the words, but for the timing. Within an hour, the post had been shared thousands of times and speculation took over. The comment section filled with guesses. Was it a friend? A former colleague? A stranger he'd met during one of his quiet visits to hospitals? But Keanu didn't guess. The moment he saw the words, he knew exactly who had written them. Her name was Elisa. 15 years ago, during a winter so cold it had frozen lakes solid across Canada, Keanu had been driving alone through the outskirts of British Columbia. He had just left a meditation retreat, needing space from the noise of the world after losing someone close to him. The road was narrow, twisted and buried under fresh snow. And somewhere along that road at dusk, he spotted a car wreck, off the embankment, half buried, with smoke curling into the sky like a silent cry for help. He pulled over, climbed down the icy slope, and found a young woman inside, barely breathing, shivering, her head bleeding and her legs pinned under the dashboard. She was conscious but fading fast. He called emergency services, wrapped her in his coat, and stayed with her for over an hour until help arrived. He didn't just wait. He sang softly to her, told her stories, kept her eyes open. He made her believe that she wouldn't die in the snow. And she didn't. After that, he disappeared. No cameras, no name, just a man who vanished as quietly as he came. Elisa spent months recovering, trying to find him, but never succeeded. The only thing she knew for sure was that her life had been saved by someone who refused to let her go. And now, after seeing what the world was finally beginning to understand, she had found the courage to come forward. Ethan turned to Keanu, who sat across from him, face still and unreadable. "It was her," Keanu said softly. "I remember everything. She was alone. She kept apologizing. She said no one was supposed to care if she disappeared." Ethan leaned forward, his voice trembling with something deeper than professionalism. "You didn't just save her physically. You saved her will to live." Keanu looked out the window, his thoughts drifting back to that night. "I didn't do anything special. I just didn't leave." And that was the thread. That was the truth that had been weaving its way quietly through every story, every moment, every letter. Keanu Reeves didn't save people with grand gestures. He saved them by staying, by not walking away when things got hard, when people got ugly, when the world looked the other way. And that quality, the rarest kind, was what now had thousands writing in, begging for more than autographs. They were asking for guidance, asking how they could learn to live like that. But for Keanu, this moment wasn't about recognition. It was about reconciliation. Because what the world didn't know was that he had left more than snow and blood behind that night. He had left a piece of himself in the cold, a piece that had never really returned. He asked Ethan for privacy. For a few hours, no phones, no press, no emails. Ethan agreed, cleared the schedule, and offered him a quiet room near the tarmac, one with a view of the runway, where planes lifted into the sky like hopes daring to fly again. There, Keanu sat alone, watching the horizon. And that's when the call came. It was Elisa. She didn't cry. She didn't even speak at first. The line was filled with soft static, as if the past itself was trying to reconnect. And finally, she said, "I always wanted to say thank you, not just for pulling me out, but for seeing me when I didn't want to be seen." Keanu closed his eyes, letting her words settle deep into the part of him he rarely visited. "You don't have to thank me," he whispered. "You did the hard part. You stayed alive." They spoke for nearly an hour, not just about the accident, but about everything in between. How she had become a counselor for young women struggling with depression. How she used her own scars to guide others back from the edge. How she kept a journal, and in every entry she reminded herself of that night in the snow, when a stranger became her turning point. When the call ended, Keanu didn't move for a long time. He just sat there, breathing, feeling, remembering. Then he stood and walked back to Ethan's office. "I want to do something," he said. "Not just words, something real." Ethan nodded. "Whatever you need." "We create a program," Keanu said. "A partnership. We train every staff member not just to manage passengers, but to connect with them, to notice, to pause, and to stay. A training program? Ethan asked. No, Keanu replied. A humanity program. And so it began. That afternoon, behind closed doors, they drafted the outline for a new project, an initiative that would place empathy at the center of every airport, every flight, every hallway and terminal. It would be named after no one. It would carry no brand. It would simply be called the Stay Initiative. Its mission, to teach people not to walk past the pain of others, to stay, just for a moment, when the world says go. The board pushed back. Investors questioned the value. Publicists warned against turning the airline into a therapy center. But Ethan didn't waver, and neither did Keanu. And as the backlash built, something else happened. Letters kept arriving. From strangers, from survivors, from employees who had once been invisible. They didn't write for fame. They wrote because they, too, had once been saved by someone who stayed. And on the eve of the official launch of the Stay Initiative, something unexpected arrived in the mailroom. A box. No return address. Inside, a small, wrapped snow globe, the kind sold at tourist stops near Canadian lakes. Inside the glass was a tiny frozen car and a man standing beside it with his coat outstretched, and on the base, a small plaque. It read, "He didn't rescue me. He reminded me I was worth rescuing." Keanu stood in the mailroom, holding the snow globe in both hands, and felt something break open inside him. Not pain, not grief. Something lighter. Something like healing. He turned to Ethan and said, "This is just the beginning," and outside under a violet sky, flights took off again, carrying not just passengers but the quiet weight of stories finally being told. The whistleblower's silence. The world watched with curious eyes as the Stay Initiative quietly launched across airports in 6 countries. It didn't come with loud banners or corporate commercials. Instead, it arrived with simple human gestures. Flight attendants greeting passengers by name, janitors trained to recognize distress, gate agents now taught to look beyond boarding passes, small things but powerful. For some it was a miracle, for others a disruption, and for one man it was a threat to everything he believed about the world. His name was Greg Mallory, a veteran journalist turned social media watchdog. Greg made his name uncovering the truth behind feel-good stories that often had darker roots. To him, every act of kindness shown in public had a hidden agenda: politics, branding, reputation. He didn't believe in heroes. He believed in masks. So when the video of Keanu Reeves went viral and the world began treating the moment as proof of moral revival, Greg smelled something else. Manipulation. He had seen it before. Manufactured redemption arcs for celebrities, fake social movements bankrolled by marketing teams, emotional bait wrapped in edited footage. And so he decided to investigate the Stay Initiative, not to celebrate it, but to unravel it. To him, if something seemed too pure to be true, it usually was. But what he didn't know was that this story didn't begin with a strategy. It began with silence, and that kind of truth is harder to break. He began his digging at the ground level, speaking to employees anonymously, watching behind the scenes with a bitter eye. He filmed footage of a crying woman at a terminal, assuming it was staged. He recorded a young gate agent offering to walk an elderly man to the restroom and called it performative. He noted every smile, every offer of help, and made timestamps in a black notebook titled "Kindness Scam." But the more he searched, the more confused he became, because the people weren't acting. They weren't performing, they were different. He found a custodian named Mark who used to mop floors in silence, now pausing to offer water to tired mothers. He found a technician named June who started checking if travelers looked anxious before calling for help. None of them had scripts. None of them had been told to sell an image. They had only gone through a simple workshop where they sat in a circle, shared real stories of times they felt invisible, and then made a promise. Not to fix everything, but to notice. To stay. One morning, frustrated with the lack of evidence, Greg decided to fly to Toronto where the original incident had occurred. There, He visited the lounge that once humiliated Keanu, the very same place now operating under a different rhythm. Inside, he found something odd. Letters. Pinned on a board near the entrance, handwritten, unedited. They were from passengers, but not the usual praise. They were confessions. I haven't smiled in years, but the lady at the gate remembered my name. I almost ended my life, but a stewardess noticed I was crying and sat with me until I calmed down. I was treated like a person, not a seat number. Greg read them one by one, and for the first time in years, something in his cynicism cracked. Not shattered, just cracked. Like an old wall, letting in a draft of warmth it had long forgotten. But his instinct fought back. He stormed out, boarded a flight, and told himself he needed the truth. Something real, not this glitter of emotion. So he did what he had always done. He tracked down the man at the center of it all, Keanu Reeves. Through a network of industry contacts, Greg was able to secure a meeting. Not with handlers, not with managers, with Keanu himself. It was quiet. In a cafe near Vancouver, no press, no noise. Just two men sitting at a corner table, the rain ticking softly against the window outside. Greg leaned forward, recorder in hand, and said bluntly, "I think this whole thing is a myth." Keanu, calm as always, simply asked, "Which part?" "The part where you're some kind of saint. The part where kindness is enough to change an industry. People don't change like that. Not without a reason." Keanu took a sip of coffee, then looked him in the eye. "Everyone has a reason. Most just forget what it is." Greg raised an eyebrow. "You really believe that?" "I don't just believe it," Keanu said. "I've lived it." And then, to Greg's disbelief, Keanu reached into his coat and handed him a folded page. It was worn, creased at the corners, the ink faded but still legible. It was a suicide note. Not from someone else, from Keanu. Dated 20 years ago. Greg's breath caught. "I wrote this the night my sister went into her final round of chemo," Keanu said. "I had nothing left. I sat in my apartment, lights off, everything quiet. But a neighbor knocked on my door, just to say she was baking cookies and wanted to share some. That moment kept me alive. She didn't know it. She never will. But she stayed. And that changed everything." Greg stared at the page in his hands. His world, built on doubt, began to sway. "You're giving this to me?" he asked. "I'm giving it to the story," Keanu said. "Not the one you're trying to write, the one that's trying to write you." And in that moment, something shifted in Greg Mallory. He didn't feel like a reporter anymore. He felt like someone who had been sitting outside too long in the cold, pretending warmth was a lie. But it wasn't. It never had been. He left the cafe without a story. He left with a truth. And that night, he wrote something he never expected. To write not an expose, not a takedown, but a letter. He titled it, "I Came to Expose a Lie. I Left with a Mirror." He published it anonymously. The letter spread fast, faster than the original video. Because this time, it came from the skeptic, the one who had doubted, who had searched, and who had been changed not by proof but by presence. And so, as the world read Greg's confession, airports lit up across the globe. Not with lights, not with upgrades, but with moments. Employees, holding umbrellas for passengers in storms, strangers hugging at baggage claims, old rivals shaking hands after years, and somewhere, a janitor in Houston taped a message to a bathroom mirror. "You don't need to be famous to stay. Just human." And outside, under the roar of another departing flight, a girl looked up, smiled at her father, and whispered, "I think people are finally starting to remember." The goodbye that stayed the final days of the Stay Initiative's launch felt unlike anything the airline industry had ever experienced. It wasn't a campaign anymore. It had transformed into a quiet global movement that no one had predicted, not even Keanu himself. The terminals had become more than just places of departure. They had become places of reckoning, of reunion, of human remembrance. The kind of places where a whispered apology felt louder than any announcement over the speakers. But even as hope bloomed like spring after a brutal winter, Keanu Reeves stood at the edge of something far more personal. He had given the world something to hold. Now he had to face what he had never fully released, his grief. The hospital in Tokyo had sent his friend's belongings by private courier. A small wooden box, no name engraved, just a note inside. He asked that only you open it. Keanu received it late one night, alone, in the corner of a staff break room at the airport's Humanitarian Response Center. No one knew he was there. The room was quiet, the clock ticking louder than it should have, and when he opened the box, he found a letter, a folded photo, and a cassette tape. He held the photo first, grainy, worn, taken 2 decades earlier. It showed them both in motorcycle helmets, arms thrown over each other's shoulders, laughing against the wind. The kind of laughter that didn't need language. Beneath it was the letter. The handwriting was messy, as though it had been written during one of the last lucid days. You always stayed. When everyone else disappeared, you were the one who sat beside me in the dark. I know I won't make it to say goodbye in person, but that's not what I want anyway. I want you to promise me one thing. Keep staying, for them. For the ones you don't know yet. For the ones too broken to ask. And when you get tired, remember this. Kindness doesn't die. It waits, and it finds its way back. Just like you did. Keanu held the letter in both hands for a long time. He didn't cry. Not in the way people expect. He closed his eyes and breathed slowly, as if every word was being absorbed into something deeper than memory. And then he picked up the tape. There was a cassette player already in the room. Someone had left it there earlier in the week for ambient music. He slid the tape in, pressed play, and sat back. What came through wasn't music. It was a voice. His friend's voice, soft, slow, raspy. If you're hearing this, it means I didn't make it to the end. But I want you to know it was worth it. Every risk, every fall. Because somewhere along the way, I met you. And if I get to leave this world knowing someone like you stayed behind, then I'm okay with that. Just one thing. Don't let them turn this into a story about you. Make it about what they can become. The tape ended with silence. A silence that wrapped around Keanu like a blanket. And in that stillness, he understood something he never had before. Not all grief is meant to be healed. Some of it is meant to be carried gently, like a flame. Not to burn you, but to light the way for others. The next morning, the airline hosted an international summit at their flagship terminal. It wasn't about profits or expansion. It was a gathering of over 200 employees from around the world, custodians, ticketing agents, flight attendants, engineers, mechanics. None were in suits. None were given scripts. They were there to speak. To share stories of how the Stay initiative had changed them, not just at work, but at home. And as they took the stage one by one, the room filled with real, trembling voices. A father from New Delhi shared how he had once ignored a crying woman at the gate. Now he sat beside her, offered his phone, and stayed until her husband arrived from the hospital. A teenage employee in Miami spoke through tears, saying she used to think her job didn't matter. Until a passenger returned 3 weeks later just to thank her for a smile that stopped them from ending their life. And an older woman from Birmingham whispered, "I never thought I'd matter again after my son died. Now I wake up every day knowing I do." Keanu didn't sit at the front. He sat in the back, hands folded, listening to every word like scripture. No cameras were allowed, no press coverage permitted. Only one rule had been given. No one is invisible today. But the most unexpected moment came when a young girl, older than 11, walked nervously onto the stage. She wasn't on the list. No one knew who she was, but she carried a small folded napkin in her hand, and her voice shook as she spoke. "My name is Luna. I was flying with my mom after my dad died. I was scared. I thought we were going to fall out of the sky, but a man sat next to me. He gave me a scarf. He said, 'Every plane has someone brave on board. Today, that's you.'" She held up the scarf. It was black, frayed at the ends. I didn't know until my mom saw him on TV. It was Keanu. The room was silent. Not a tearless face remained, and somewhere in the back Keanu lowered his head into his hands, unable to speak, the weight of it finally catching up. Not the fame, not the recognition, but the truth that every small act had landed somewhere, had taken root, had stayed. After the summit, the airline president, Ethan, took the stage. His face, usually composed, looked overwhelmed, and in his hands, he held a document, one final surprise that only he and the board had planned. "We've made a decision," he said. "Effective immediately, we are establishing a permanent humanitarian wing of this company. Its mission is simple: presence over policy. We are renaming our internal staff code of ethics as the Reeves Protocol, not to honor a celebrity, but to remind every single one of us what it means to show up fully for another person. Every airport, every city, every gate." The applause was thunderous. But Keanu, who had quietly slipped away after Luna spoke, stood alone near the window of the terminal, watching another plane lift into the sky. He wasn't interested in protocol or honors. He was thinking of a woman who once knocked on his door with cookies, a friend who left him a letter inside a wooden box, a scarf given to a frightened girl, and 1,000 strangers whose lives had quietly intertwined with his through something no one could trademark: human kindness. As he stood there, a flight attendant approached him gently. "Sir," she said softly, "your flight's ready. Are you heading home?" Keanu looked out at the runway, then back at her. "No," he said, smiling faintly. "I think I'll stay a little longer." And somewhere, across the world, a man sat in a lonely airport chair, tears in his eyes, reading a message scrawled in pen across a wall poster. "You matter. Someone stayed because of you, now go and stay for someone else." The story had ended, but the kindness had only just begun.